Previously on BladeYGO.
I got bad.
How did we get here? Structure deck, master of Pendulum Evolution. 3 things for the TCG. Firstly, actual 60 card set. Second, the new Magician cards. Skullcrabat Joker get banned. Double Iris Magician was banned. Heavymetalfoes Electrumite Magician.
And now we return you to your regularly scheduled program. Electrumite only required 2 Pendulum monsters, very similarly to the idea of Issel, 2 Tales of the Nobulenites. Electrumite could use any Pendulum monster to get access to it. This was both an amazing thing and a bad thing, as while this made Electrumite easier to get into, it also meant because of its overwhelmingly good effect to place any Pendulum in the extra deck, destroying a face-up card to add a monster from the extra deck to the hand, and then being able to draw a card, it was just too good of a link monster for any Pendulum deck to not play, and it really made Pendulum a lot more linear of a strategy. Not that this was a bad thing, and regardless of this though, it didn't change how absurd this card was. If you paid attention to part 1 of the video, I stated Pendulum Evolution did 3 things for the TCG, but I never stated the third one. Well, the third thing on that list was indeed the release of Astrograph Sorcerer. This card at 3 copies made a significant impact, as when you destroy something with Electrumite, you can trigger Astrograph to special summon itself and search a card that was destroyed this turn. Granted, this card was still played pre-Electrumite, but this single interaction is what truly broke this card and made it a powerhouse combo enabler, being able to constantly use Electrum and recur more resources while putting additional bodies on the field all outside of your Pendulum summon. This interaction was so powerful, it even enabled another variant of Pendulum Magician to exist, arguably way more degenerate. Out of the 3 Electrumite Magician variants to exist, this was Adderall Pendulum, a variant focused around vomiting your hand onto the table and setting up multiple negate boards and seeing if your opponent can break it. While this variant was the least popular variant out of the 3, there were 2 things that made this so noteworthy. 1, the creator of it, and boy, YouTubing would not be the same without him, Triff Gaming. But secondarily, you could argue that this variant had some influence as to what Pendulum Magician would look like from here on out and Pendulum as a whole. Let's not delve too far down the rabbit hole with that or Triff Gaming, because I will be talking about Triff later, but Triff is an important name to note ever since Electrumite was released, and clearly you can't make a history of Pendulum Magician video and not include Triff Gaming in it. Back to the history though, there was indeed a 3rd variant of Magician to exist, and it was either the best variant or the worst variant depending on how you saw it. This was the Pendulum FTK variant, a more fragile variant than the Astrograph midrange variant and Adderall Pendulum variant, but what this deck had over the others was its degenerate ability to FTK. See, Pendulum at this time had many non-hard ones per turn effects, and this enabled this degenerate combo along with the use of the Supreme King cards, specifically Dark Worm, both Gate 0 and Infinity, and finally Supreme King Starving Venom. The way the combo would work is you get access to both Gate 0 and Infinity through cards like Electrum and Dark Worm. You can place both Infinity and 0 in the skills, then you can use the effect of Infinity to pop both Infinity and 0, search Instant Fusion, then you can use Instant Fusion to summon Lyrilusk Independent Nightingale. So this card was crucial because it had a burn effect that burned for 500 damage times its level. This was absurd. In the past, we see a card like Tyrant Neptune get banned specifically because of this card's release. However, it's ironic because Pendulum actually had an effect that could copy Independent Nightingale, and that card was Supreme King Starving Venom. Supreme King Starving Venom was a non-hard once per turn, keep that in mind, effect that could copy Nightingale, and because its level was perfectly 8, it could burn for 4,000 damage using the copied effect. Now, because this is a non-hard once per turn effect, you can summon 2 Starving Venoms and use both of their effects in order to burn for 4,000 each, dealing exactly 8,000 points of damage, causing the FTK to occur. This combo combo in retrospect was almost a perfect storm of Pendulum cards and were absurd in the archetype. All these non-hard ones per turn effects combined became massively absurd, and it definitely showed as Pendulum would keep doing significantly well, and was definitely the most represented deck of that format. The argument of what variant to play really comes down, however, to how resilient or powerful you want your deck to be, and in general it seemed more people cared about resiliency than anything else. That is why the Pendulum FTK variant was not as represented as the mid-range Pendulum variant. Before we continue, if you are a patron or channel member, everything that's happened so far, you would have seen before anyone else. You can also make people realize that Pendulum best deck, let's go baby, by becoming a channel member or patron, but I mean that's not the point here. If you want sneak peek clips of my videos, gain a special role on my Discord server, which on another side note, definitely make sure to join. It's an awesome community and I love to have you there. The link to the Discord is in the description down below. But besides my Discord, you will want to check out my channel memberships and Patreon. Those are both amazing ways to support the channel with new exclusive content for members and patrons coming soon. Check it out in the description below. The final thing to note is that it wasn't just Magician Pendulum as the only Pendulum variant. This format we also had true Draco Metalfoes as a deck. While normally a deck like Metalfoes only thrives in an MR3 based format in unison with the true Draco cards, Metalfoes just gain too much advantage because of their inherent synergy of combination being a continuous trap that searches more Metalfoes when sent from the field to the graveyard. This variant's most powerful asset was not only using Electrumite to its absolute maximum because it is a Metalfoe card, you could also abuse Astrograph Sorcerer better in this deck than any other deck because all of the Metalfoes can trigger it, and finally the true Draco cards add another layer to the deck by combining the Metalfoe disruption they can produce with the masterpiece on the field. Speaking of True Draco, this was another deck in the format, the second most represented one to be exact, but the problem with it prior, as stated in part 1, was its inability to deal with Sleeper. And now that Spiral isn't a concern, True Draco can thrive again. Now with the addition of a Mono Awado to combat Pendulum going second and going first to deal with hand traps. One other thing to note was while True Draco could honestly break any Pendulum board quite well, especially with cards like a Mono Awado, if they can't break any board, or in other terms, they play the FTK variant, they basically lose game 1 when losing the die roll. True Draco at the highest number would main deck 2 hand traps for game 1, usually either Ghost Reaper or Ghost Ogre, and most people were not maining any hand traps in the first place. Because of this, it made the Pendulum FTK matchup the most scary matchup for True Draco because, well, they can't deal with it. This format would continue with Pendulum and True Draco being at the top of the metagame, True Draco Metalfoes, that grass looks greener strategies including Lightsworn Zombie and Dinosaur variants utilizing the newly released Overtext Coatlas, Trickstar, and more. What's interesting is we had the release of Flames of Destruction, a set that made Goki viable. It would have been quite interesting to see how a format would have played out with Goki, Pendulum, True Draco, and eventually Sky Striker Trickstar, but this was cut short with the May 2018 ban list being upon us. At this point, Pendulum Magician received 2 massive changes. The first was the ban of Astrograph Sorcerer, and the second was Starving Venom getting hit to 0. This didn't necessarily kill Magicians, as clearly Electrumite was still an insane link monster, and they were able to get past these 2 setbacks. Triff Gaming piloted the deck to a top 32 finish at YCS New Jersey, more on that specifically later, and shockingly the deck came second place at not only the UK WCQ, but even the NA WCQ as well. While these feats were very impressive, this would also be around the time Pendulum really started to fade out of the metagame, with new decks starting to take the stage like Goki, Sky Striker, Thunder Dragon, and eventually Salamangreat and Orcus. It began to shine on this Pendulum-based strategy that they're just getting old. It's hard to imagine a strategy that has stood the test of time as long as they have and still be viable. Burning Abyss. Sorry, I had a cough there. Regardless of topping every now and again, in April 2019, we saw the release of the Endymion strategy, a spell counter Pendulum strategy that only power creates Magicians when people realized that the Endymion cards were just better. Sure, over time, time, Pendulum Magicians even utilized Endymion as an engine, but by no means was it tier 1. The true end of this era of Pendulum, in my opinion at least, wasn't even when magicians clearly were not represented enough for tier 1 status, or when people just stopped playing magicians over Endymion. But the true end to this era was the limit of Servant of Endymion and the ban of Electrumite. Even with an ending like this, magicians have still accomplished so much in their time in the spotlight. There's always a point in someone's life when they're just too old to keep up, and instead they set up the stage for the next generation of Pendulum Endymion. And with that, that's the history of magician. Okay, hold on. We still got one more part to go, so bear with me here. As I was saying in the previous part, thank you, Past Blade. We're not actually done with this video yet. And there's one more thing, or rather people, we need to talk about. The Pendulum community. People love pendulums. Out of all communities in the game, Pendulum has to be one of the most dedicated and beloved, with a big reason for that being the aforementioned player and Yugi-tuber by the name of Triff Gaming. However, if there's one thing to take away from this video, is that as corny as this sounds, the quote, "with great power comes great responsibility," is an important lesson to learn. In September 2018, Triff Gaming was banned from playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For 1 year for unsporting conduct. This was a result of things he stated in his top 32 deck profile at YCS New Jersey. And honestly, I don't want to show any clips or explain why he was banned further than that for the sake of not blowing things out of proportions and it being a figment of the past. However, regardless of this ban, it really exemplifies the idea that great power also requires great responsibility. In the late 1950s, John French and Bertram Raven published the book The Basis of Social Power, where they mentioned the 5 forms of power in the world, eventually adding a 6th. One of these powers is known as referent power, or simplified is known as power in numbers. The idea is that more people, allies, or quote-unquote followers you have, the more power you have, and that can be shown clearly through any celebrity with an audience like a YouTuber. But with this kind of power, you have a great responsibility to not abuse your power, and one could argue that was what happened here, leading to his year ban. But let's really get back to the original question asked in this 2-part video. I asked at the beginning, how did we get here? And well, I actually don't know. How did we get here? If you're as confused as I somehow am, I mean, I must have amnesia. Why don't you go back and watch part 1 to find out? Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and with that, I hope to see you soon.